Hi friends, it's Auntie Cuckoo and I'm back with 4 more DIYs for your summer or patriotic decor. These are something I like to call free DIYs instead of DIYs. These are all household items that I have transformed into pieces of decor for just pennies using some paper and fabric I had around the house. So we're gonna make 2 different kinds of firecrackers or fireworks, an Uncle Sam's hat, and my personal favorite, this large patriotic flower. And I bet you'll never guess what we'll make it out of. Milk cartons. Yes, that's right. I have been saving milk cartons for a few weeks, washing them out and cutting them into strips to go ahead and have some plastic ready for this flower. Now, if you don't get traditional gallons of milk, just think outside of the box about what plastic you have around the house. Since my lid is black and I'm going for a red, white, and blue theme, I decided to give this a quick coat of blue just around the edge, but stay tuned to the end because you may want to cut that step out altogether. Next up, I grabbed some scrapbook paper that I picked up 4 sheets on sale for $1 at Hobby Lobby to cut out a circle to cover the top of our lid. Then I used a layer of Mod Podge to adhere the paper to the top of the lid. I let that one dry and then I went ahead and went back with another coat. Now let's work on those petals. For this part, I used a large section or side of my milk jug. I cut that part in half and then used that shape as a guide for cutting petals. Now they don't have to be perfect, so don't sweat it. Just kind of go for a teardrop shape. Then use your petals as a guide for cutting out your fabric. Now I decided to use scrap fabric for this. You could use paper or even paint them. Once I put a layer of the Mod Podge onto each petal, I went ahead and pressed down firmly with my fabric on top. Now go back around the petal with my scissors, trimming off any excess fabric. Then add one more layer of Mod Podge on the top of your petals and set them aside to dry. You're going to repeat this process over and over until you have enough petals for your flower. So I ended up with 17 petals and I separated them into sizes. I didn't have any plan going into making my petals, I just made them as I went. So I decided to add the smaller petals first, which I only had 3 of, so I spaced them out equally. Gluing your petals on is fairly simple, although I will recommend using a higher temperature glue gun. I did start out with my lower temperature glue gun and it didn't adhere as well as when I plugged in my higher power hot glue gun. Then I went back around, adding my medium petals as evenly as possible all the way around the flower. And then finally my larger petals. Once you have all your petals glued onto your center of your flower, I decided it might be a good idea to add a little stability to the back. So I cut out the center of a paper plate and got out my hot glue gun again to glue it down to the back of my flower. Now this added support to the petals that are all around the back of the flower, and it finishes off the back side so it doesn't look so bad, especially if you're going to hang it anywhere around a mirror where you may catch a glimpse of the back of the flower. You could always use some scrap cardboard for this as well. Then I got to thinking and I decided to pull out some rope that I have in my craft stash. I thought it would be super cute to hot glue the rope around the edge of the center of the flower using my hot glue gun. So as you can see, you could totally skip the step of painting around the edge if you decided to add something like some jute, some cord, or some rope around the edge of your flower. And I think it really finished it off well. Once my flower was finished, I added just a bit of rope to the back for hanging it, and I am so happy with how this one came out. Now let's move on to DIY number 2 and 3. For this project, we're going to use the same item in 2 different ways to make both an Uncle Sam hat and a firecracker. For this, you'll need some oatmeal containers. Now these are a smaller size, although you could use the larger one. I'll be using 2 small. And for our Uncle Sam hat, I'll also be using the top of a very large can you guys saw a couple DIYs ago. And again, you could use anything for this. It's just going to be the flat bill of our hat. So the first thing I did was pull out more craft paper. I'm going to use my oatmeal container as a guide to cut out a circle for the top of the container. So it's just slightly too large, so I'll go ahead and give it a quick trim around the edges so that it fits right down on the top of our hat. Now it's time for the sides. For this, I pulled out a red and white striped piece of paper and folded it in half as a guide to go ahead and cut it in half. I did this so that I had enough of this paper to go around the entire edge of our hat, and I also wanted my stripes vertical. Now I will need a little more paper to cover the entire surface of my hat or oatmeal container, so I pulled out some star paper, and this will act as the trim around the top of our hat near the bill. You can always dry fit your paper to your oatmeal container so you know exactly how much you're going to need. Now it's time for adhering our paper to our hat. So I pulled out my handy dandy Mod Podge and started covering my oatmeal container with a thin layer. For this step, it is best to work in small sections, and if you're working with something like a stripe, you really want to make sure you're getting it on straight. Then go ahead and continue to add a little bit of Mod Podge at a time in a thin layer underneath your paper, adding it and smoothing it as you go. Now, if you run out of paper before you run out of your oatmeal carton, don't worry, just finish off this edge of your paper, make sure it is nice and flat, and then go ahead and cut a strip that matches your other print. Add a layer of Mod Podge, and just add your paper right on top and let it dry. Once that layer has dried, you can go ahead along the top with another layer of your Mod Podge, and then set this one aside to dry as well. I also Mod Podged the top of my hat just to make sure that paper would stay in place. Now it's time for adding that trim along the base of the hat right up against where our bill will be. So I went ahead and added a thin layer of Mod Podge, adding my star paper at the same point as the seams on my striped paper. That way my hat will truly have a front and a back. So just add your paper as you go, and once you run out of that print of paper, go ahead and add a little bit of Mod Podge and match up your next strip as closely as possible. Then continue adding a little bit of Mod Podge and a little bit of your paper all around the edge of your hat. Now I will say that thinner layers definitely work out better when it comes to using Mod Podge with paper. Then you can trim off your paper exactly where you need it to be and make sure that those seams are nice and flat. Then you can add another layer of Mod Podge once that has fully dried. For the base of my hat, I took the lid top outside and gave it a quick coat of navy blue spray paint, and I let that dry thoroughly. Then once it was ready to go and my hat was fully dried from my Mod Podge, I added a bit of hot glue around the inside of my oatmeal container. And that is all there is to making this super simple and extremely inexpensive Uncle Sam's hat for your decor. Now let's move on to a similar DIY, our firecracker. They are so similar, in fact, I'm gonna skip the first couple steps, which I've already showed you, covering the top and sides of our oatmeal container. Now for this one, I did pull out a little nautical rope from the Dollar Tree, and this is gonna act as our wick for our firecracker. I used just a little bit of hot glue right in the center of the top of my oatmeal container. Then I added my nautical rope, holding it in place while it dried. And that was all there was to making this one into a firecracker, but I felt it needed a little something. So I did pull out some rickrack from my craft stash to add just a little touch of red around the sides of my firecracker. I measured out just enough to do a little stripe around the top and the bottom. Now rickrack can be found at places like Walmart and Hobby Lobby, and I usually can find it for around 99 cents. I am so happy with how this one turned out. I was not thinking I would love it this much, but I was inspired by it, so we're gonna go ahead on to DIY number 4, which is another patriotic firecracker. For this one, we're using a shampoo bottle. That's right, an empty shampoo bottle. This is actually a shampoo I picked up at the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to go ahead and give it a quick coat of blue paint right around the top. Once my paint is dry, I'm going to go ahead and add some paper around the sides of my shampoo bottle. So for this, I pulled out some more red and white stripe, using my bottle as a guide to measure my paper. Now it's time to put our paper on the shampoo bottle. For this, I added some Mod Podge to the underside of my paper before putting my bottle on top and really rolling it tight. Again, adding my Mod Podge as I go, just a bit at a time to make sure that it really adheres to the bottle. I love taking things that would have normally ended up in the trash and transforming them with things like fabric and paper. I can always find craft paper on sale at places like Hobby Lobby, where I can find it 4 sheets for just $1, which makes this project just pennies. Now for the top of our firecracker, I pulled out some super thin jute twine from the Dollar Tree, just added a bit on the inside of the lid, attached the lid, and then used my hot glue gun to go ahead and glue down a little bit of twine as I go, rolling it around the entire top. Be sure to leave a spot on the top open, perfect for adding the wick to your firework, which is more of the nautical rope from the Dollar Tree. I'm just adding a generous amount of hot glue in the center and then attaching my wick. Now you could be done here, and I think this turned out adorable, but I've been working with a lot of fabric making masks lately, and I have some patriotic fabric with a beautiful image on it. So I decided to cut some of that fabric out and Mod Podge it on top of my paper. You could always use some decorative paper, stickers, or anything else you wanted to embellish your firecracker. I also decided to add a layer of Mod Podge to my jute twine just to sort of seal it all. And you guys, I think this turned out so cute. The kids walked in right away and said dynamite, so they completely understood what I was going for in my fireworks, and I think together they are super cute. I hope you enjoyed seeing my 4 easy free DIYs. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you back very soon.